The title of this study, and I'm not exactly sure how many parts it's going to have, but the name that we've given to it is Christ's Core Conflict on the Cross. In other words, there were many battles, many aspects and facets to the crucifixion, but there was one core issue there that had to be faced by Jesus Christ. And once you see it, you will come to really appreciate what he went through to die for our sins and beyond. Because dying for the sins of mankind is not the only issue on the cross. And the core issue, as is the issue in the angelic challenge, is can Lucifer defeat Jesus Christ? Now, we're going to give you ahead of time where we're headed. We believe that in the hours of darkness between noon and 3 o'clock on the cross, that Jesus Christ went through a battle with Lucifer. And it was unlike the other battles that Christ faced when Lucifer and he were combatants. This was different, this was unusual, this was unique. And Lucifer had all of the advantages, and yet, during that time, Jesus Christ came out victorious. Even though he was battered, even though he was weakened, even though he was strapped to the cross, he was nailed there, and could not use his hands and feet and the like, Lucifer still attacked him during those hours. Now, in the gospel, we have 7 sayings of Christ on the cross. But as I've been studying in other places in the Word, I've come to realize that during those hours of darkness, Jesus Christ said some other things, and especially like in the Psalms and the Messianic Psalms, when Jesus Christ cried out. We have that in the Gospel. My God, why have you forsaken me? But it's interesting that the psalmist in these Messianic Psalms said, why are you so far from helping me? Now that sheds another light on it. Here he is on the cross, and the Spirit and the Father have forsaken him. Now, why did they forsake him? Well, the standard answer is Jesus Christ was made sin, and these 2 members of the Godhead are too holy and pure to look on sin, so they turned their back. But then he cried out, why are you so far from helping me? What does that have to do with anything? Well, what it has to do with is the fact that Lucifer pounced on Jesus Christ on the cross, and he and Lucifer had a battle that only he alone could win. If the Father had helped him, if the Spirit had helped him, he would have lost the angelic conflict. And in this totally weakened condition, he faced Lucifer with the power of will against the power of will, and still came out victorious. And that will give us a greater appreciation of just what he went through on the cross for us. But it's going to take us a little while to get there. As always, we build a foundation and give you background material. But the background material itself is really quite fascinating. And you'll see it as we go along here. First thing we want to consider is the objective of Lucifer. This is told us in the last part of verse number 14. He says, I will be like the Most High. Now, we have studied the angelic conflict and challenge before. And we know that the Father said to Christ, you have enemies. Now, of course, they're the enemies of the Father, but that's not the issue in the angelic challenge. The issue is, can Lucifer beat Christ? Is Lucifer more capable and competent than Jesus Christ, seated at the right hand of the Father, to run the universe? I mean, who's the best in government? We can understand that when we see, every 2 years, every 4 years, and local elections and the like, people are fighting for their man or their woman in office to represent them. So that's the challenge, and we've seen that. But the objective is that Lucifer wants that chair, and he wants to show both the Father, the Son, the Spirit, the angels, and now men, that he can be the equal of Christ, yea, rather, he can be the superior of Christ. And so that's what it's all about. I will be like the Most High. That was his original motivation then. It's his motivation during the human aspect of the angelic conflict, and it will be his objective forever. It's in his heart, even in the lake of fire. So you've got to keep that in mind. Now, what does this phrase, the Most High, represent? Come back to Genesis 14. Genesis 14. And there we see that this particular phrase represents not just governing power. You can be a governor and not an owner of something. For example, our mayor, we elected him to govern us here in Evansville for a 4-year period of time. But he doesn't own Evansville. He wants to rule it for as long as we'll allow him to rule it and be our leader, but he doesn't own the property. Lucifer wants to be like the Most High God in that he both sits there and rules and owns it all. Now, Paul addresses this, and we've considered it so many times, that Jesus Christ created and all things were made by him for him. He made these things so that he could own them and run them, and his fullness and personality might permeate everything. So, this is also an aspect of Lucifer's strategy. He wants to best Christ as political leader so that he might acquire ownership of it all. Note in Genesis 14, verse number 19. Melchizedek blessed Abraham of the Most High God. And note this phrase, who is the possessor of heaven and earth. So Lucifer not only wants to run the show, he wants to have the title deed to it all. So from the highest heaven to the lowest, from the surface of the earth to the interior, he wants to say this is absolutely mine. But now, there are some other things we need to understand. It's not just the heaven and the landmass, it also includes the sea. Turn with me to Acts chapter 4. Now, what they're doing in Acts 4 is actually quoted in Exodus 20. We'll not go there, same thing is said. But in Exodus 20, in talking about the 7 days and the Sabbath day, it talks about the Lord making heavens and the earth, or remaking them, we believe. And it says something about the sea. Verse number 24. When they heard that, they lifted up their voice to God with one accord and said, Lord, thou art God. You have made heaven and earth and the sea and all that in them is. So if Lucifer is going to be like the Most High God, he's got to come to rule space, the heavens, the landmass, and also the sea. And we're going to come to find out that Lucifer has a real penchant for the sea. This Disney movie out, Atlantis, studying Atlantis is fascinating. And I believe that it may truly have roots back in the pre-Adamite existence, the original angelic dispensation, where there was earth and Lucifer's kingdom on it, and what God did to that kingdom with its palaces and its cities and the like, and how he sunk it in the midst of the sea. And so this mythical city, supposedly, Atlantis, is really a true city that once existed, that God judged. Then Lucifer had his throne there. But that's neither here nor there. It's these various things. Now, the angelic conflict is really confined then, first of all, to the earth. Men were created to the earth. They cannot fly in space like the angels. So, if it's going to be resolved, everything has to focus back on the earth to see how God resolves these things. So here's Lucifer. As we turn to 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5. Here's Lucifer, who wants to be like the Most High, rule it and own it, and he's got to, with regard to the earth, hit the landmass and the sea. And we're going to find out that's just exactly what he does when he presents animals that he models himself after. Now, the first of these is the king of the landmass animals, the king of beasts known as the lion. All right, verse number 8. First animal model that is preeminent in Lucifer's thinking is, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Now this is going to give us a little insight into the cross. Because Jesus Christ from the cross said, save me from the lion's mouth. In other words, if I'm victorious over him, Father, let there be a time limit so that he just doesn't keep on. That's the significance of it is finished. Not just salvation, but the battle on the cross that was hidden from you. Just some fascinating things. It says there that the sun was darkened, the earth was darkened, and the land was dark, meaning the land of Israel. Three things were darkened so that nobody could see what was going on in the cross. And the angels couldn't see it, men couldn't see it. You say, well, Pastor, if that's so, how could Lucifer have seen it? And the way that he saw it is Jesus Christ yelled out a challenge. Here I am, come get me. And it's in the book of Isaiah, and it's in the book of Psalms, and it's something that I had not seen before. And it was the word of Jesus Christ that led Lucifer straight to him. So that on that cross, it was mano a mano, as they say. It was one-on-one, and nobody else could be there. No one else could see it. And Jesus Christ, with his own voice, said, come and get me. Let's get it on. Let's finish this once and for all. And so that happened between 12 and 3 on that day he was crucified. But what was the lion trying to do? Well, the lion was trying to extract or devour the human spirit just as he had done with the first federal head, Adam. He did it pretty good. He ate up Adam's spiritual life till it was non-existent. He devoured Adam. And on the cross, he wanted to get Jesus Christ to sin so that he might devour him. And once he had sinned, that's it. But he didn't do it. Thus the significance, as we have said, of him saying, Father, it's finished. Into thy hands I commend my spirit. He won. Now, therefore, he presents himself as, verse 8, a roaring lion. Now, let's go back to Genesis chapter 3. There is another creature that he presents himself as. And this creature is another king that embodies or epitomizes all that's out there by way of creatures. The lion is the king of the beasts, but there is even an animal that will outdo him as to subtlety. Verse number 1, Genesis 3. Now the serpent, this is the second animal, was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. So he's king of creature subtlety. Now, this is cunning to hunt by design. The ability to camouflage himself, the ability to wait there very, very still until his prey comes, then pounce on him and the like. The ability to open up his jaw and swallow the prey whole once he gets him in his grip and the like. Now, this particular thing, like the lion, is also consistently representing Satan through Scripture. Let's go to Revelation 12. Revelation chapter 12. And we'll bypass the first part of this because we're going to get to that in a moment. But verse 9 of Revelation 12 says, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. Down here in verse number 14, to the woman was given 2 wings as a great eagle, that she might fly to the wilderness, to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent, says verse number 15. So this is indicative of his subtlety and his cunning and his traps and his snares to get people out of their protective hiding places and to devour them as well. So on the one hand, as king of beasts, it shows his direct confrontational power. On the other hand, it shows how he can lure people and trick people and deceive them. So, he's king of all land creatures. He's king of all creature subtlety. And that has to do with the land mass. But now, what about the ocean? Let's come back to Psalms 104. There is another creature that Satan uses as a model. Psalms 104. Now, what is that creature? That creature is Leviathan. And especially in the earth as Lucifer originally knew it, he admired this creature called Leviathan. Leviathan was a real sea creature. Verse number, in Psalms 104, verse number 25. O Lord, how manifold are thy works, in wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your riches, so great and wide is the sea. Wherein are things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts. There are the swarms, that's the word ships there. There are the swarms, and there is that Leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein. Now Leviathan therefore was a real creature made of God, especially in the pre-Adamite earth and sea. Something odd about this Leviathan that we need to look at. Turn back to Psalm 74. Psalm 74. We'll start with verse number 12. And it says, For God is my king of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You did divide the sea by your strength. You broke the head of the dragons in the water. Now there's something else that we're going to look at here. Evidently, not only Lucifer is going to model himself after these creatures, but there are going to be others of his cohorts using Leviathan and these other creatures. Note what it says in verse 14. You have broken the heads, plural, of Leviathan in pieces. Now, we believe, and we'll be able to prove by comparing Scripture, that Leviathan was a massive sea creature. He was the biggest of all the dinosaurs, and that he had 7 heads. He was a 7-headed beast, and he was really admired of the devil, Lucifer at the time. Now, how do we know this? Come with me to Job 41. Job 41. Now you'll remember, as we have studied Lucifer from both the book of Isaiah and the book of Ezekiel, that the prophets writing there seem to be writing to a man, the king of Babylon, the prince of Tyre, the king of Tyre. And then all of a sudden, you begin reading these things, and you see that he has to be referring to some other type creature than this man, Because when it says, like in Ezekiel, you have been in Eden, the garden of God. You've been on the mountain of God. You're the anointed cherub that covered. And all of this is addressed to the king of Tyre. Now, what does that mean? It means that angels sometimes, especially Lucifer, uses, just like these animals here. He uses, and God uses them too, these people and beasts to represent a personality, characteristics, a function of Lucifer's personality and strategy. And so you have these men listed, but then you realize he's really talking about Lucifer. You have these animals listed, but then you realize he's really talking about Lucifer or his cohorts. So let's begin reading with verse number 1. Now, we're going to read the entire chapter. Usually we don't do this, but we'll make comments as we go, because I want you to be familiar with somebody that we've not talked about here ever in my knowledge, except just brief comments, and that's Leviathan. But that Leviathan is the model, like the lion and the serpent, of Lucifer. All right. He's asking Job, canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook? Excuse, that's a little divine humor. Oh, I got me a big one on there. Yeah, right. You're going to really reel him in. And that's the question here. Oh, come on, Job. Can you do this really? Or is his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? I mean, you're going to let a little loop here, and he goes for the bait, and all of a sudden you're going to catch him, and you're going to really bring him in. Can you put a hook into his nose? Can you bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications? And the word supplication there, is he humbly going to submit to you? And here's this massive creature. Who knows how big he was, but we understand that some of the brontosaurus type dinosaurs were just massive things that could reach way up into the tallest trees and weighed just hundreds of pounds and tons. And so, will he make supplications to you? Will he speak soft words to you? That's the thing. If you stir him up, you don't. I'm not going to take a bone from a dog that's hungry, let alone Leviathan, his food. Just not going to do it. Are you going to make a covenant? Is he going to make a covenant with you? Will you make him for a servant forever? Is he going to be your pet and submit? Will you play with him as with a bird? Will you bind him for your maid? Oh, this is impressive. I've got Leviathan. No, excuse me, I can't do it this afternoon because I have to take Leviathan for a little walk in the community. No. And here he is on this little leash. And he's speaking facetiously here because he wants to impress upon Job the powerfulness of this beast, the immensity of Leviathan. Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with barbed thorns? Now, he's beginning to describe the characteristics of this beast. Here is a whale. A whale is a massive animal. Again, some of them weighing tons upon tons. Can his skin be pierced with a barbed iron? Yes, that's what a harpoon is. And what is a barbed iron? Well, it has a spear head with a little hook on it so that it can penetrate through the skin, but then you pull it out and the hook catches in the skin so that it is sunk in there and can't get away. And that's what he's asking him. Can you fill his skin with barbed ends? In other words, you can't penetrate it, it's so thick. His head with fish spears? Lay thine hand upon him, remember the battle, do no more. Remember the hope of him is in vain. Not one shall be cast down, even at the sight of him. Now, all of a sudden here, he begins saying, there's a battle with Leviathan. And under normal circumstances, a man can't beat Leviathan. But Leviathan is going to be beaten. And he's going to be beaten by God, especially God the Son at the cross. When at the cross, these three animals are represented as fighting the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, we've got some more here. None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? That's Leviathan speaking. Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. This is Leviathan. Who can discover the face of his garment? Who can come to him with his double bridle? Now that's interesting because we are contending that Leviathan has 7 heads. All right. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. Now this just simply means that his scales are so thick that armor cannot pierce. You can't put an arrow there. You can't send a spear through it. But not only that, he is just like a tank. He is covered from head to toe with these scales so thick and so close, they're sealed together so that you cannot harm this beast. You have to go about defeating him in another way. So, they are joined one to another, verse 17. They stick together that they cannot be sundered. By his neesings a light doth shine. Now, here we're coming to another aspect of this. His neesings mean his sneezings. The light does shine means he's fire breathing. He sneezes and it poof. You know, you don't want to be in front of him when he sneezes because you're going to be burnt toast. This is an unusual creature, and as we'll see in just a little bit, he's going to end up, Lucifer, combining all of these animals and pictured as a mythical beast, the dragon. Let's follow with me. Okay? Don't want to get ahead of ourselves. His breath kindles coals. The flame goes out of his mouth. His neck remains strength. Sorrow was turned into joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. Now, note this. His heart is as firm as stone. Now, that's unusual to say about an animal. His heart. It has determination. It has a resolve. It is set towards something. And the reason I'm pointing these things out is because by the time we get to the end of this passage, you're going to see that God is using Leviathan to actually represent Lucifer. And the Lucifer has taken on the Leviathan characteristics because he really admires this beast. And the Leviathan is his hero or his model. All right, let's go on. Yea, as hard as a piece of the nether millstone. When he raises up himself, the mighty are afraid. By reason of breakings, they purify themselves. In other words, they just also almost worship him or do worship him as a god. The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold. The spear of the dark, the habergeon. Now, habergeon means that your armor. It doesn't matter if you're a knight of the round table with all of the armor and the sword and the shield and the lance. You cannot defeat this creature. He esteems iron as straw, brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned with him into stubble. They just bounce off. Darts are counted as stubble. He laughs at the shaking of the spear. Can you imagine? Here's this puny man in front of this massive beast with a spear. I'm going to get you. And here Leviathan's laughing. You can't penetrate. So it says, sharp stones are under him. He spreads sharp pointed things upon the mire. I want you to keep that in mind because of where we're going to point out that Leviathan lives. Leviathan lives at a place under the sea where there's mire. A place that you and I are very familiar with. Right at the Red Sea where they crossed. And God made the mire solid ground so that Israel could cross right over the Red Sea in the presence of Leviathan, and he couldn't do anything about it because the waters were congealed as a wall on both sides of them, and he dried up the mire, dry ground. It's really fascinating. But I have to take you here first, so be patient with me. Let's go on. He spreadeth sharp pointed things upon the mire. In other words, they just sink down if you go to where he lives trying to hunt him and catch him. He makes the deep to boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He makes a path to shine after him. Now that's an interesting thing, because we saw in Psalms 7, there goes Leviathan to play. He makes this path. And it actually has to do with his diving down, and the fact that he makes the ocean light before him. In other words, he is providing light in a dark ocean through the natural means he has. One would think the deep to be hoary, that is gray, impenetrable as the darkness, but not with somebody who carries his, he's got his own lighter right there with him, his own torch. Upon the earth there is not his light, who is made without fear. Here is another key phrase. He beholdeth all high things. Now, who is that? There's no real animal, of course, that says, boy, here's my motivation to be like the Most High God. My motivation is to climb the corporate ladder. My motivation is to sit there at the right hand of the Father. No. He's talking about Lucifer. But Lucifer using the tactics of this sea monster and this creature as his own model to go on. And here's the last part, which is the censure. He is the king over all the children of pride. In the book of Job, pride is mentioned. It's all mentioned in relation to men who are proud, arrogant men against God. And this creature, representing Satan, is king over all the children of pride. So 3 kings we've got here. A king of the landmass, a king of creature subtlety, and the king of the sea creatures. All mighty hunters tactically in and of themselves. But now let's go back to Revelation chapter 12. There is one more creature that we need to take note of. That Lucifer uses as a main model of himself. And in mythology, the serpent as to his tail, the lion as to his claws, and Leviathan as to the sea creature, the massive creature, are all combined into one creature called the what? Dragon. So here we are back in Revelation chapter 12, and note verse number 3. And the dragon, by the way, can fly, or is represented as having wings. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. You ever wonder why the Red Sea might be called the Red Sea? It's because originally there was a red creature that lived there. And that red creature was this dragon. It's the combination of the 3. So it's a reference. And we're going to see that in the depths of the sea, there is a main opening there, which Jesus called the gates of hell, the doors of hell, the depths of hell. And that it was through the Red Sea, in the presence of Leviathan, who had the keys of death and hell at the time, and Lucifer was just simply trying to direct Pharaoh, and God too led them right to this point in the Red Sea, and he had a plan in mind. He was going to hurt Leviathan. He was going to wound him, as we'll look at in a couple of verses. And how do you wound him? But taking him right through your house, your palace, your territory, and making it, and tramping on it, making it profane or common, and you not be able to do anything about it. And that's exactly what he did. 2 million people traipsed through the Red Sea, through Leviathan's house, and he was stuck there because everything was frozen or dried up. And he couldn't open the gates of hell. Now, that's how he's going to wound him. But here is the dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And issue is made also of his tail in verse 4. His tail drew the 3rd part of the star. He is called the dragon several times, verse number 9, the great dragon and the lion. So the dragon is a combination of these three real animals into a mythical creature that is not real in actuality, but represents a real entity, Lucifer himself. Now let's go back to Isaiah chapter 27 before our time runs out here. I don't want to leave you hanging, though I do. Pique a little interest. Isaiah 27, and note what it says. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan. Now, it's talking about a future time. Leviathan, the lion, the serpent, and the combination, the dragon, are all going to be punished. But just like everything else, when you direct it toward the lion, the serpent, Leviathan, the dragon, God is speaking of various punishments directed to how they are, or how they're represented. And he's going to punish them in that fashion. He calls Leviathan the piercing serpent. And now that simply means that this serpent is so massive, he is just like the Titanic in the ocean. It goes through and it leaves a wake and waves and the like. That's what it means. It's piercing the water. You Navy men know what I'm talking about. When those big boats go through there and the waves come up from it and it sends a wake to its sides. And that's the piercing serpent. Even Leviathan, the crooked serpent. So it's representing all aspects of these three animals. And note what it says. And he shall eventually slay the dragon that is where? In the sea. Lucifer has kingship of the sea. And God is eventually going to deal with him on the land and on the sea. He's going to deal with him as the lion, as the serpent, as Leviathan, and then totally as the dragon. Now here's the thing. Isaiah chapter 51. 51, same book. Now, that is the final time that God is going to wound the dragon. But there were times before when he wounded this beast. Chapter 51 in Isaiah, verse number 9. Awake, awake, put on the strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake, note, as in the ancient days, in the generations of old. Isaiah is going right back to Egypt and the Exodus and the passing through of the Red Sea. Art thou not it that have cut Rahab? Now the cutting of Rahab means the destruction of Egypt. Egypt was Rahab was a daughter of Ham, a daughter of Canaan, and the Egyptians were children of Ham, and God judged them. What he did was cut them to the quick, both killing people and also leaving them alive and decimated. They were totally destroyed emotionally and mentally because of the plagues and what God did to all of their soldiers and armies. No. And you wounded the dragon. Now the word wounded there, kalal in the Hebrew, means to wound by disrespecting one's person or violating the sanctity of one's home or territory. In other words, here was his palace, his pride and joy. We're going to see it. It's in the midst of the Red Sea. And he's got the keys of death and hell. And this thing is right there. And God, he thought that he was going to destroy the children of Israel by leading them across with Pharaoh, chasing them right to this point, and putting them in the Red Sea, opening up the gates of hell, and just drop right in. Would he destroy them? Absolutely. Now, Instead, God parted the waters, dried the mire, the seabed, and he froze all the mechanisms throughout, all the gates. And Israel walked over on dry land. And in the midst of that, here comes Pharaoh's armies, and he thawed everything in an instant of time. And Pharaoh's armies, as we'll see, are going to go down to hell at that point. Pharaoh's armies are going to, instead of Israel, Pharaoh's soldiers are going to go down into the pit instead of Israel. Now, how do we know that? Well, let's look right here. It says in verse 14, Art thou not it which hath dried the sea? When did he wound the dragon? When he dried the sea. The waters of the great deep that hath made the depths of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over. When was the dragon wounded? Isaiah 51:10. Did I say that? We're little, yeah. Have mercy on an aging pastor.
It shows we're paying attention.
I didn't hear.
It shows we're paying attention.
Yeah, it does. You see, I really just did that just to see if you were paying attention. I really didn't forget. Okay, verse 10. Art thou not it which dried the sea? Now, when was he wounded? When the sea was dry. When the waters of the great deep were dry. When you made the depths of the sea. There's another key phrase, the depths of the sea. Because it's going to be in the depths of the sea that we're going to find the gate of hell. And we're going to find the home of Leviathan. And we're going to see that there's more significance to the crossing of the Red Sea than what is apparent. What I thought for all this time, it's a great miracle, no doubt. But if this is true, it's even a greater miracle. Why? Because he wounded the dragon there. He hurt him, he stirred him up. Man cannot do it, but God did it. And the dragon was just beside himself and wanting to do so, but he couldn't because God prevented it. And Israel was saved, and the dragon's old men went down right where he wanted Israel to go down, into the heart of the earth. All right. Now, let's go back to Job 26. I've just got a minute. We'll read this verse and start here tonight. This wasn't the first place that God wounded the dragon. Job 26. When the Lord originally created the earth, and then when he recreated the earth, there was only one continent. One continent. A sea mass here and a land mass here. All right? And so Lucifer set up shop, land mass, sea mass. And God wounded him in another way. Verse number 12. God divided the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through the proud. Now, what happened? With the remaining moments, we'll tell you, and we'll start here next time. Turn back to Genesis 25. We'll address these, and then we'll start here next time. Sorry. Genesis 10, verse 25. Doesn't do me any good to hurry. Now, here's what happened, and here's what's being referred to. We're at the Tower of Babel, where all humanity was brought together in one world system on one continent. And here's how God is going to hurt the pride of the dragon. Here's how God's going to wound the dragon again. In a very similar fashion. He's going to take the battle right to him, and the dragon can't do anything about it. You know, in verse number 1 of chapter 11, the whole earth was of one language, one speech, and one continent. And so God went down, and if we'll come to verse number 9, it's called Babel because the Lord confounded the language and scattered them abroad upon the face of the earth. All right, now we come back to Genesis 10, verse 25. He also did something else there that wounded the dragon in his pride. He had every nation under his control. And what did God do? He changed their language. He scattered them abroad. And verse number 25. And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided. God divided the earth into continents at that particular time, keeping the nations apart, at least temporarily, keeping the nations apart. And so we see God wounding the dragon, and then finally wounding the dragon at the end.